Hello friends! Today I want to talk to you guys about a flavonoid named quercetin. I want you to know ahead of time that in the bio or description of this video below, you'll find a link to my blog. If you open that link, what you'll find is a 6 to 7 page review of quercetin with citations, in which I have bullet points in individual sections, like a section on cardiovascular disease, a section on the brain, a section on cancer. And in each of those sections, I have bullet points. So maybe you can see my notes a little bit here. I have bullet points on each one. So if you'd like to see these notes, which just glimpsing them, you don't have to read in great detail. You learn a lot about the details of quercetin and some interesting elements of it. I'm going to try not to go in as much detail as I normally do in my supplement reviews, because I realize that it's hard for people to pay attention to these kind of very detailed things for a long time. So instead, I'm gonna give you guys my notes on my blog so you can go to the notes directly and learn details about the molecule quercetin. In this review, I'm gonna tell you the highlights of these notes instead, so it's a little bit easier to follow, hopefully. So first of all, quercetin is a flavonoid. It's specifically a flavanol. Let me give you some examples. So first of all, flavonoids flavonoids are a group of phytochemicals that have subdivisions. They include flavanols, flavones, I can't pronounce this one, it's flavonons, catechins, and anthocyanins. Within the flavanols, which is where quercetin is, you have quercetin, fisetin, which you may have heard of before, galandin, camphorol, myricetin, which you may have heard of also, quercitrin, and rutin, which is really, rutin is a kind of quercetin. Although, to be honest, some people supplement both of them, but they're just different kinds of forms of quercetin, really. So quercetin is found in two forms. One is quercetin aglycone, which is found in like onions and foods and stuff like that. And the other is quercetin rutinoside, which is also called rutin, which is found mostly in teas. The next thing I want to tell you is about quercetin from foods. So the richest quercetin containing foods are a certain kind of berry, elderberries, followed by red onions, followed by white onions, followed by cranberries, followed by green hot peppers, followed by kale, followed by blueberries, followed by red apples, which, as you can see, is pretty interesting because none of these, most of these vegetables or fruits have different colors. Well, they're all vegetables. No, vegetables or fruits, they have different colors. So this is not the kind of, so you have a red onion, a white onion, you have a blueberry, they all have a lot of quercetin in them. So it's pretty interesting. You can't go by color with this. So let me tell you now the overall highlights about this molecule, which I supplement personally, but I'm not as enthusiastic about supplementing this molecule as I am with some other molecules for some reasons, which I'm going to mention in this review. So first of all, what are the highlights about quercetin? First of all, quercetin can neutralize free radicals, similar to like vitamin C or vitamin A or whatever. In fact, for example, in human leukemia cells, it is 3.5 times more powerful than curcumin at neutralizing reactive oxygen species, according to the total antioxidant capacity. So it's more powerful than curcumin in some contexts. It's not the most powerful. EGCG is always more powerful, and some other things are always more powerful. But for example, in the ORAC test, which is, there are different kinds of like antioxidant tests. In the ORAC test, for example, camphorol and myricetin are more powerful, and all of the catechins are, as I said, led by EGCG. But it's for example, it's a better scavenger than alpha tocopherol in the FRAP and ABTS assays of antioxidant capacity. But there's some element that's interesting about this neutralization of free radicals, because quercetin is able to damage DNA. So it's more able, for example, to damage DNA than EGCG. So some of these kinds of phytochemicals in high concentrations can actually cause damage to our own cells and DNA and things like that. And quercetin seems to be slightly more capable at doing this than some of the other phytochemicals. So that's one thing that makes me a little bit more hesitant about quercetin in general. Now in the brain, quercetin is very interesting. If you go to my notes, you'll see basically there's a lot of context. So usually when you study the brain or how something affects the brain, there are certain contexts that they do that in. For example, they inject mice with a toxin called MPTP to kill their dopaminergic neurons, so they develop Parkinson's disease. Or they do something similar with transgenic mice with Alzheimer's disease, or they do something similar with lipopolysaccharides, which are released by the microbiome and cause inflammation. And so they see, for example, how does that molecule, does it inhibit inflammation in the nervous system? And so quercetin does that. Quercetin protects people's nervous systems and brains from a variety, or at least, sorry, protects rodents' brains from a variety of standard tests that are done with these kind of molecules. Specifically, the most interesting thing with regard to the quercetin and the brain is, you'll see across my notes you'll see I guess a motif, which is an increase in the transcription of BDNF mRNA, as well as increased BDNF transmission, increased the availability of BDNF's target, which is TRKB. So the receptor TRKB is agonized by brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So quercetin both seems to consistently increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor in rodents, as well as the transcription of the mRNA and all that. So yeah, you could go into more details in my brain section to learn more about that. There's a variety of cancers that have been cancer cell lines, as well as cancers, like stimulated cancers in rodents that have that quercetin has shown efficacy at selectively being cytotoxic or killing the cancer cell lines. So there's a lot of them. If you go through my notes, you'll see blood cancers, brain cancers, lung cancers, uterine cancers, skin cancers, salivary gland cancers, osteosarcoma, hepatocellular carcinoma, liver cancer, which is pretty interesting, by the way. So let me mention this actually. Quercetin is being investigated as a treatment for primary liver tumors due to its competitive inhibition of the glucose transporter 1, which is GLUT1, which is upregulated in primary liver tumors. So anyway, there's a lot of different kinds of cancers, breast cancers. So a lot of these different kinds of cancers, quercetin appears cytotoxic for them. Now the liver is another interesting subject as well. So quercetin repeatedly has been shown to be protective on hepatocytes under a variety of kind of stressors. It enhances NRF2 expression, which is a gene transcription expression that is anti-inflammatory. It protects the liver from fibrosis. Actually, this is one particularly interesting thing about quercetin. Many organs are protected from fibrosis because of quercetin, including the kidneys, liver, lung fibrosis, other kinds of fibrosis also. That's one of the themes of quercetin that's really interesting. So it protects the liver from steatosis due to ethanol, from it's antifibrotic, as I mentioned. It protects the liver from lipopolysaccharide-induced injury. There's a variety of different things. Basically, it's very liver protective, it appears. Now the kidneys, it also appears kidney protective, but it's possible because most of the quercetin that's consumed by people appears to be stored in their kidneys and livers, and less so in the brain and lungs and in other places. So people who have really impaired kidney function may end up harming their kidneys slightly. But there's also, it's been shown to protect kidneys in cases of acute injury. So for example, from the chemotherapeutic drug cisplatin, from iron-dependent necrosis, because iron is toxic to many parts of our bodies. It protects the kidneys from iron-dependent necrosis. It protects the kidneys from cadmium toxicity, which cadmium is a heavy metal, a poisonous one found frequently in chocolate. It protects the kidneys from fibrosis, as I mentioned. It protects the kidneys from obstructive nephropathy, which usually happens with diabetes, stuff like that, by suppressing mTORC1 and mTORC2, which is the complexes 1 and 2 of the mechanistic target of rapamycin, which is that major growth pathway which we try to inhibit sometimes for longevity purposes. It also, as I mentioned, deals with fibrosis in the lungs. Now, one other interesting thing about quercetin is it seems to inhibit adipogenesis, the creation of new adipocytes. It limits the accumulation of fat in existing adipocytes, and it activates UCP1 and UCP2, which are uncoupling proteins, which in white fat, which causes the browning of white fat. For those of you that haven't seen my video on this, if you search cold on my channel, you'll find a video about how the cold affects fat, the browning of fat. Browning of fat is when fat develops mitochondria. When it's rich in mitochondria, it turns brown and is thermically active. So it's much less harmful for our health to have brown fat than white fat. Well, it seems quercetin is one of those molecules that can cause the body to convert white fat into brown fat in adulthood. In terms of cardiovascular disease, there are some slight things I should mention here, some small things. One has been shown to remodel left ventricular hypertrophy in rodents. It's been shown to reduce blood pressure only in hypertensives and without improving measures of oxidative stress. So, excuse me, this is one of the main things I want to tell you guys about quercetin. So, I've already covered 2 supplements. One of the supplements I covered actually lowers C-reactive protein and measures of oxidative stress in people when supplemented. Quercetin doesn't. Quercetin may improve some markers of human health, but it does not improve oxidative stress markers. It will not lower C-reactive protein. Although, for example, it's supposed to inhibit microglia activation in the central nervous system, which means it's supposed to inhibit inflammation in the central nervous system, it doesn't seem to affect inflammatory markers in the body. So that's an interesting thing. Another thing I should mention, some of the effects on cardiovascular health from quercetin are due to its modulation of either the PPR alpha or the PPR gamma receptors, which, if you guys know about the research chemical cardarine, that agonizes the PPR delta or beta receptors. They have 2 names. But this quercetin affects the gamma and alpha receptors. Another interesting thing in terms of cardiovascular disease is quercetin has been shown to lower homocysteine. So homocysteine, high homocysteine levels are an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease and atherosclerosis. And having poor genes or less effective MTHFR enzymes or other methylation related enzymes means that some people will end up with high homocysteine levels, like myself. And quercetin has been shown to reduce those homocysteine levels. Now, there's something quite interesting about quercetin's effect on hypertension and lipids. It seems dependent on whether a person is an ApoE4 variant carrier or an ApoE3 variant carrier. These are genetic polymorphisms. For example, I'm an ApoE3 carrier. I have 2-3 alleles. Or not, they're not alleles actually, but I have, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But the point is, I'm ApoE3. Some people are ApoE4, some people are ApoE2. ApoE2 makes you a little bit less, it protects you from cardiovascular disease, whereas ApoE4 makes you far more likely to develop cardiovascular disease, as well as Alzheimer's disease, obviously. So people with, so quercetin decreased systolic blood pressure only in ApoE3 carriers in humans. And quercetin worsened lipid ratios among ApoE4 carriers, which is really interesting because this also happened with fish oil. So fish oil has been found to raise HDL levels in ApoE4 carriers, whereas it doesn't do that, for example, in ApoE3 carriers as often. So anyway, that's the cardiovascular disease section. I'm just going over some highlights, and at the end I'm going to summarize as well. So you know, in terms of longevity, see, this is an example of why quercetin is a little confusing. So, for example, it increases the lifespan of C. elegans. C. elegans are very small creatures, simple creatures that are studied for longevity often. It increases the lifespan of C. elegans by 15%, which is not that much. Like caloric restriction would do it for more than 50% or so. But it actually has been shown to reduce the lifespan of rodents when given as part of their diet, like a certain percentage, 0.1% of their diets. It is, however, an activator of sirtuin-1, but weaker than resveratrol. And of course, I should mention the most important thing regarding longevity. What quercetin is most known for in the longevity community is that it is a senolytic compound. It has been shown to cause apoptosis in senescent cells. So what are senescent cells? Your cells have a certain number of times in life that they can divide and, multiply. At a certain number of divisions, like over 40 divisions of a cell, the cell has a choice either to die or to become sort of like a zombie cell. This zombie cell is called a senescent cell. Senescent cells don't function fully, but they do release inflammatory cytokines and cause oxidative stress in the area that they're around. So senescent cells, for example, are thought to be one of the major contributors for joint pain in elderly people. Quercetin kills senescent cells. So this is one of the most unique things about quercetin, and one of the things that people most want to study it for. So yeah, and that's quite interesting. But quercetin also has effects, for example, on hormones. So it's never been shown to do this in humans, but in rodents it increases steroidogenesis, which means it increases the production of sex hormones. It also can transactivate estrogen receptor alpha and beta. It also, in the microbiome, it can increase the variety of bacteria that we have, which is a very important marker of microbiome health, and it can kill certain types of bacteria as well. And I think that's, oh yeah, another interesting thing I wanted to say is that sometimes the effect of quercetin on rodents depends on how much vitamin D the rodents are getting. Quercetin is actually, it activates or it binds to the vitamin D receptor. And it's being studied actually as the first molecule from which scientists hope to build a molecule that can modulate, allosterically modulate the vitamin D receptor. Meaning, instead of activating it, it can make it more receptive to, for example, vitamin D, or less receptive. So that's another interesting thing. It's also been shown in one controlled Iranian trial to improve symptoms of arthritis, although I don't really understand how it can do that if it's not lowering inflammatory measures in the body. It's been shown to stimulate melanin synthesis. All these little random things, if you look through my notes, you'll find a lot of interesting random things like that. So before I get to the summary, let me tell you a little bit about supplements. So if you go to my blog post, you'll find I've linked some of what I think are the recommended supplements. First of all, I'd like you guys to know how much do people normally consume of quercetin. So the average person consumes between 3 and 40 milligrams of quercetin a day in the Western diet. People who overconsume or hyperconsume vegetables and fruits, like vegans, tend to consume 250 milligrams of quercetin. Supplemental quercetin is usually 500 milligrams to a gram. So they're much higher doses. So in terms of the supplemental versions, there's a quercetin phytosome, which is developed out of phosphatidylcholine. So it has basically a lipid layer, a fatty layer around it to help for its absorption. And it is up to 20 times more bioavailable than normal quercetin. Quercetin is also better absorbed when taken with glucose and better absorbed when consumed with fats. It is more bioavailable in onions than apples, although there's just more of it in onions than apples as well. So here's the supplemental options, which are linked on my blog. You can go click the links and find them. The cheapest reviewed, third-party reviewed quercetin is from Bulk Supplements. It's 11 cents for 500 milligrams of quercetin. The cheapest capsule, because that's a powder, I believe. The cheapest capsule that was reviewed by a third-party tester is Solar Ray Quercetin, which I'll have a link to, which is 17 cents for 500 milligrams of quercetin. Although I sometimes use Doublewood's supplemental form, and they cost less than 7 cents, which is cheaper than both of these for 500 milligrams. The Now brand is similarly cheap, which I trust as well. And Thorne Research carries the quercetin phytosome, which is 60 cents for 500 milligrams, 60 cents for 250 milligrams. And it's made, as I mentioned, from sunflower lecithin, which has phosphatidylcholine in it. So that's sort of a review of quercetin. I know this is not nearly as detailed as my other supplemental reviews, but I want you guys to let me know, is this better, or would you guys like me basically to read through the notes and comment on them individually? I don't know. But here's the summary of quercetin. The interesting things about it, as I mentioned, it's senolytic. It binds to the vitamin D receptor, which is very unusual. In animals, across animals really, it increases steroidogenesis. It does not improve measures of oxidative stress or inflammation in the body. It consistently increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which increases the birth of new neurons in the brain across animal studies. It consistently is I forgot what the word is for this, but basically it inhibits fibrosis or reduces fibrosis in a variety of organs, including the lungs, the kidneys, the liver, probably other places too if it's researched further. Because you can also get fibrosis in your heart and all kinds of places. Fibrosis, by the way, means it's like sort of like scar tissue. When an organ is damaged for a long time, the body starts to deposit collagen there. So this can happen in your liver as well. It can happen in all kinds of places. It can really happen in your heart too. Like especially people who exercise a tremendous amount, like long-term runners and stuff like that can get fibrosis in their heart as well. So also quercetin consistently across studies shows that it activates AMP kinase, which is a nutrient sensing pathway, which is activated when when we do cardio, for example, or when we fast. And it consistently, consistently, it's been shown to inhibit mTOR, or mTOR in general, let's say, mechanistic target of rapamycin, which is sort of an opposite pathway, which is a growth pathway. And as I mentioned, it has this unique element of the increasing uncoupling protein 1 and uncoupling protein 2, which can increase the browning of fat, which is a great thing. And finally, it activates a couple of the PPAR receptors, or the PPA receptors, which include alpha and gamma. So that's my review of quercetin. I hope you guys will visit the blog so you can see more details about the supplement and decide whether you like it. The reason I use it personally is because of the brain-derived neurotrophic factor results which have been seen across rodent studies so consistently. So that's the thing that attracts me to it. I don't eat uncooked onions, and I do eat a lot of vegetables and fruits as well, and I probably do get something like 250 milligrams of quercetin a day or something from fruits and vegetables. But I supplement 500 milligrams in addition to that, mainly for the sake of my brain. But I think other people may do it for senolytic reasons. Those are the two most attractive reasons to include quercetin. Now I'm going to continue reviewing these flavonoids. Potentially I'm going to review rutin on its own, although I'm not completely sure because rutin is very similar. But I'm definitely going to review, for example, fisetin. And then I'm going to go into other groups that are not flavanols through this series. So we're going to go through a lot of different phytochemicals, hopefully, and we'll get a feeling for them all. You can make a decision if you want quercetin yourself. If your priorities are in your brain function or averting Alzheimer's disease or averting declines in cognitive function, I think it may be really useful. I hope this was helpful, guys. Let me know if you have any comments, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.